I always considered that it was very difficult to make a detective game. Even Lost Judgment, which I loved, I liked it because it had a lot of moments that weren't from a detective game, but simply from a brawler. Master Detective Archives Raincode suffers from all the problems that my head created for this genre, always seeming more like an interactive film than a game. Since you are here, consider to leave a sub for the channel. I mostly review indie games, but I also give the news. It's a very good deal. Well, it's free, so that's the reason why. Technically, there is a lot in Master Detective Archives Raincode that is extremely well made. I will emphasize two components. The voice acting is of remarkable quality even in the English version, something that does not always happen in a game made in Japan. Given the large number of secondary characters, it is difficult to make them memorable, but great care was taken with the choice of actors who always managed to impress individuality on each one of them, regardless of how long they appeared on the screen. Something that was often complicated by some dialogues much more suited to the Japanese reality than the Western one, ending up taking some moments out of the context with the rest of the story. This was counterbalanced by the fact that not all the game had voice acting, with many texts only punctuated by small introductory interjections with nothing else, at the same time that some of the writing seemed a little lazy when compared to the rest of the game, especially when we enter the side missions. Considering that the game has so much dialogue, I'm glad they opted to make this investment, even being enough to devalue the lack of lip sync or even the lack of any movement of the lips when the character speaks. I have nothing to say about the soundtrack. Most of it's enigmatic as you want and expect, but completely adapt to what is happening on the screen, changing when we enter any minigame, comic relief moment, or even when we change the scenario. If you want me to be nitpicky, I can say that it becomes repetitive at certain points, as I found myself thinking a few times that I was hearing the same theme from the haunted house all over again. Graphically, we already know that the Switch is not a powerhouse, but even so the game didn't look well optimized, with the constant use of rain giving the idea that it wants to mask something that's missing, imitating what happened with the emblematic fog of Silent Hill. A cel-shaded game, but with a very granular aspect that made it difficult to even read some of the lines when using the console in handheld mode. In addition to that, there are a lot of pop-ins, objects that disappear and effects that are not suited for the situation. It may seem like a scary description, but none of these problems are important in the context of what is happening on the screen. And some of the things I like the least just seem like creative choices that could please anyone else. We play as Yuma Cocohead and we start the game by waking up inside a pantry with any memory of our previous life. This amnesia will prove to be permanent and is one of the central landmarks of the story. Without knowing what to do, some of the mechanics are explained to us while pushing us towards the first mission, which serves, in essence, as an ongoing tutorial, and the way it was structured made it one of my favorite tutorials ever, giving the sublime way in which it was included in the story, while at the same time making its preambular function very clear. We discover that we are part of the World Detective Agency and we are sent to Kanai World, a city isolated from the rest of the world that follows its own rules. Our duty as detectives is to investigate some strange events that are happening there. Yuma's personality is very well written in his first moment, but gradually it becomes incoherent. I don't know if it was done purposefully, but certainly seems to me unnecessary, as the clear moments of indecision about himself often deny facets already assumed by him previously. Also at this stage we start to notice that we spend as much time looking at the loading screen as doing something else, since the game is formed by a set of small maps, each one of them linked by one of these loading screens. At this point the console itself also comes into play again, as the Switch is not a marvel of processing capacity and each one of these screens is much longer than I would like it to be, often separated from the next by just a short period of time. Fortunately, this problem is quickly minimized by the fast travel system, but doesn't come close to eliminate it. If we are detectives, we have to investigate. In this game, we investigate crimes. At an early stage in the game, we realize that our amnesia comes from a pact we made with the Death God, the sensual and funny Shinigami, with whom only we can interact during most of the game. This pact gives us some incredible powers that we uncover during the game. The character of Shinigami introduces a contrast to all the seriousness of the game, being a full-mouthed and a much more funnier character than the rest, with lots of humorous quips that result to a greater or less extent depending on the situation, but also introduces the already expected sexual innuendo in anime games, whether due to the moments of reduced clothing, generous attributes with exaggerated physics, or the constant teasing she throws at Yuma. What I liked the most about the game were the periods of investigation. Firstly, because I was actually doing something and not just skipping dialogue, and secondly, because the scenarios were actually clever and well designed. Of course, this is where I have some difficulty in finding the fun of these games, since the investigation was generally simplistic, limiting us just to click on certain already marked points in the scenario, placing a huge burden on the intelligent writing of the crime, with our delight only being satisfied if its resolution surprised us, and happily, I can say that I was satisfied with that point. Although, if to be picky again, some of the deductions were based on far-fetched extrapolations, going so far as to use subterfuges not supported by the evidence to resolve some of these cases, with that creating some loopholes in some of the cases. After this investigation phase, we move on to the resolution phase, which takes place in the Mystery Labyrinth, a mental construction of the criminals to try to hide their crime. To be honest, I expected much more from this phase, a moment of discovery, but which becomes repetitive, long and often boring, with minigames like the super innovative quick-time events that I've always loved, alternated with word puzzles that I didn't like, although not always because of the degree of fun they provided, but because they asked for solutions in English, and at times when, even though I knew what they wanted me to write, I wasn't sure which of the synonymous words was the right one. It's also a shame that a game with such well-designed and characterized bosses has such uninspired boss battles, either because of the minigames that represented them, or because the way they gave us the facts that, although generally obvious, their discovery was constantly spoiled by the clues given by Shinigami. Adding to this, the penalty for failing is low and accompanied by more clues, almost forcing us the solution down our throats. In addition to the main mission, there are also some secondary ones duly marked on the map, but those are nothing more than fetch quests with little interest other than the attribution of a few more progression points, a progression that I never considered motivating or really relevant to the game. The game is divided into chapters, each of which is clearly divided into beginning, middle and end. When we complete each one of them, we are given a score that once again contributes to the progression of our attributes. Master Detective Archives Raincode is a classical detective game, looking very inspired by games like Danganronpa, and what for me is slow pace or a boring moment or an excess of dialogue is nothing more than a natural sum of the characteristics that define the genre. What is most important to highlight is the creativity of the story and the scenarios, the investigation itself and the abilities to surprise us. Although there are some holes here and there, in that regard it doesn't disappoint at any time, and if you don't mind watching thousands of loading screens, you'll certainly enjoy playing it. See you next time, guys. Bye!